In James Wan's *Malignant*, there's a midpoint reveal that is so absurd, you almost want to stand up, cheer, and laugh all at the same time. It's a horror movie, sure, but it's a popcorn horror movie. Are they scary? Well, your mileage may vary. However, there are some movies that come along that are not claptraps or popcorn munching flicks. These are ones that glue your eyes to the screen. And once they're done, it's time to call your mom and tell her you love her. This is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you, man?
You look so great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Listeners who, can't see us right now, just know I'm wearing a very ridiculous Mario costume of sorts.
Yeah, and I'm just wearing a simple sweater. It's a Halloween themed sweater, and you can't really see it fully on YouTube. I'm going to pull it up a little bit, but it says I'm with Spooky, and it shows a skeleton hand. And then I'm also wearing an old school Spooky Dude hat that we used to sell.
Yeah, I think you wore that I'm with Spooky sweatshirt when we did the Child's Play reaction.
Yeah.
You wore that, and then I also wore the Harry Potter outfit. As you can see, this is a very low budget podcast. We're recycling, you know what I mean?
I thought like 2 years ago we basically bought a few Halloween costumes and just never bought more.
Except the cheeseburger. Now that's going to be added to the collection.
Yeah, the one that we did for Halloween where you wore the cheeseburger, that was new. That's right.
Yeah.
This I kept the gloves, suspenders, and hat in a Ziploc bag for you.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember you asked me, I was like, you still have them? I'm like, yeah, man, I keep them. I'm like a mom. I'm like not throwing away our outfits.
And it came in handy, you know?
Exactly. Well, I can just go into the intro now. Welcome to Movies That Changed Us. I'm Altaf.
And I'm Chris.
And if you're listening to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to our podcast, then you can also watch us at YouTube at Movies That Changed Us.
And we also have a Patreon if you want to check us out and get some ad-free early access videos. You could watch us probably like a couple days early at this point. And you go to patreon.com/movies that changed us.
Right now, we're doing a horror comedy commentary series where every Sunday we're going to upload a commentary track watching a horror comedy, which is what our patrons voted for. By the time this episode comes out, we would have uploaded Evil Dead 2,
Tucker and Dale.
We were rewatching that again, and we did that on our reaction channel. And it's kind of funny that we're doing Tucker and Dale, which is basically a reverse Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good way to put it.
Hoobie Halloween for the real heads.
That's gonna be a selling point. Got to get on that Patreon for that Hoobie Halloween commentary.
Okay, so we're gonna do something different for this podcast. I don't know if you remember, but we usually have the whole how this movie changed us at the end.
Did you say you don't know if I remember? It was my idea.
But I don't know if you forgot while we were shooting, oh shit, I'm doing it now. But we want to do the whole how this movie changed us in the beginning and then kind of work backwards.
Yeah, because normally we wrap it up with, how did this movie change you?
So I want to know, man, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as long as I've known you, has been one of your favorite movies. You've talked about it for a while. How did this movie change you?
Well, I've heard of Texas Chainsaw Massacre since I was a kid. It started because going back to classic Blockbuster stores. I feel like a lot of our podcasts start with this. I was probably 9 or 10 and I came across the VHS for the 2003 movie.
Okay.
I didn't even know there was an old one or that it was a remake. I was 9 or 10 years old. I didn't care. And I read the back, and it was like a chainsaw wielding maniac. You've been warned. It's presented like it's the scariest fucking thing you've ever heard of in your life. There's a quote from critics that you want scary. This is scary.
It'll make you gouge your eyes out.
All that stuff, exactly. And so
it's like when the trailer for Longlegs was coming out, and it was like, this is the most insane movie you've ever seen.
Exactly, totally. Kind of gave off that energy.
Yeah.
So I've heard of it for a while, and I think I finally saw it around middle school. The remake. I started with the remake in 2003.
Sure, yeah.
And so point is, though, I think this is the first slasher movie that I've seen that's really gross. You know what I'm saying? Normally, I feel like Michael Myers has a sterileness to him, right? Because he's in his clean little outfit. He wears a pale white mask. Leatherface is a mask out of human skin out in the sweaty daytime middle of nowhere area with, skin decorations everywhere, whatever, all that stuff. So I think point is, I kind of, as a kid, was kind of exposed to how truly gross humans are. And I think that was a big part of my, whatever you want to call them, my horror influences, what freaked me out as a kid.
Yeah, no, I think I'm very similar. I kind of have a very similar story. I came across this movie from like hearing about like the remakes, the 2000 versions, 2003 version or whatever, and I didn't even know it was like a 1970s movie. So kind of the same story. Obviously, I said this on Halloween, but I was never a horror fan when I was a kid because I was a scaredy cat. If you listen to our Halloween episode, you'll know all about that. And it, exactly. And I didn't watch this movie until like college. And even then I was like kind of half watching it, half being like, I don't know, I want to get out of here. And I gotta say, even though I have become more of a horror fan as the years have gone by, I've been binging horror movies every October. I have a Shudder account, yada, yada, yada. I still watch this movie, and it still gives me that same feeling like the first time I watched it, which was get me the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Same here, actually. Same.
And like, I second everything you said about it feeling gross, which is the kind of a takeaway I have every time I watch this movie is just like, it just feels so sweaty. It feels so grimy. And a lot of that has to do with the way it was also shot, like 16 millimeter. We'll talk all about that, but I think that's kind of my main takeaway and how this movie changed me is it never feels different when I watch it. You know how some horror movies, like if you watch it a bunch of times, it kind of like
it gets old.
The experience becomes different, which is like, oh, I'm about to see my favorite scene. Texas Chainsaw Massacre still gives me the exact same feeling when that hitchhiker comes in the van. Like it makes me feel the exact same way, which is a huge testament.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware of this, that Leatherface is heavily inspired by Ed Gein.
No.
Okay, do you know who that is? Ed Gein?
Absolutely not. So tell me about him.
Ed Gein was a serial killer and grave robber, and he was mostly known for, like, when he would steal bodies and stuff, he would, like, this is going to be gross for listeners and viewers, but I'm sure you all know who he is, that he used, like, body parts as, like, decor for his house and stuff all over. Like, he had chairs with human skin all over. Like, he did all sorts of nasty shit, with corpses. And so he inspired Leatherface. He inspired Norman Bates. He also inspired Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. Like, and if you think about all, they all use like weird human parts for their own personal projects, and so
it's part of their aesthetic.
Yeah, but Leatherface is one of like kind of the OGs, and so some people when Texas Chainsaw is presented as like a true story in this kind of documentary style, people say like, oh well, it's technically kind of based off of Ed Gein.
Right. I remember us like talking about in Halloween, my whole take with Halloween was that did Halloween inspire all modern true crime television? And I remember you said, it was like, well, Texas Chainsaw, it's interesting because Texas Chainsaw feels like a true crime story.
Yeah.
As the way it starts is very iconic, obviously, with the what's
narration?
John Larroquette's narration.
Yeah.
But yeah, from the moment it starts, it feels like, oh, the world is burning around us. And like, especially with those news stories that are playing through the radio as the title cards are coming up, it just immediately puts you in this sense of dread. And then when we cut to the van with the kids in there, you suddenly have this feeling of like, oh, we're about to experience one of the stories that was in the radio broadcast. Like, it kind of feels like, and this is another chapter in the true crime of America.
Yeah.
And
there's this like kind of, there's this fear in the air throughout the whole thing.
Well, that's what's kind of amazing about the movie is that like it starts with basically telling the audience is that shit's going to go completely wrong and many of them are not going to make it out alive. And like, so immediately, like, it's not like trying to pull a rug from under you. It immediately tells you what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's queuing you up mentally for what you're going to see.
Yeah, and even though, like, everyone goes into a horror movie knowing, especially in a slasher, that people are going to die, no movie is so upfront about what it's going to do as this movie is.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because I heard that, like, during the credits, how there's that weird kind of blurry red behind the text. Apparently those are just close-up images of the sun, which I learned.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is kind of fascinating to me.
So I wrote down in my notes, you might have seen it, is like there's like a whole genre of movies that I would put Texas Chainsaw in, which is like the I don't feel good movies. There's horror movies like Malignant, which I mentioned in my synopsis, that are like popcorn horror. you know?
I would even consider it the one we just did last
Popcorn
time. Was
horror.
popcorn horror. We talked about that.
100%. Even though there's moments in it that are very upsetting, but it still feels like, oh, I want to see this with a packed crowd, and you remember the experience of seeing it's fun. You know, and obviously, like I said, your mileage may vary. Like there's some people that might just find it completely upsetting who don't have a stomach for horror at all. But for people who are like horror fans, that kind of movie experience is very different than seeing something like Texas Chainsaw, right? Yeah. And so I wrote down a list of like the I don't feel good movies. So I have it right here. I'm trying to not talk away from the mic, but okay. So I wrote down Hereditary, Babadook, Speak No Evil. Personally, I think the Danish version, because the remake feels more like the popcorn horror, because the US remake feels more just like, oh, this was made for an American audience that is can't handle the cynicism of the Danish one.
Yeah.
You haven't seen either Speak No Evil movie,
so
I won't spoil it for you. For audiences, I would highly recommend, even if you've seen the American version, go see the Danish version. It's on Shudder if you have Shudder, or just rent it or whatever, because it is the second half of the Danish version is wildly different than the American version. Then the two more movies is Blue Velvet, the David Lynch movie, which I saw for the first time recently, and it's actually, I think, going to be one of my favorite movies. I loved it.
Just of all time.
Yeah. Have you seen any of Blue Velvet? I forget. Do you know any images from that movie?
Maybe if I wouldn't be able to recognize it, but I've probably seen something from it. Yeah.
There's like a 5-minute scene with Dennis Hopper in it that is just like going to stay in my mind forever. And When Evil Lurks, which came out, I think, a year and a half ago now. That's also on Shudder.
Sure.
These are, an Exorcist I would count as one of them too.
Oh yeah.
That's
100%.
not on my list, but I just thought of that. These are movies that are like, I'm not okay while I'm watching them, and I want to get out of there. Like, you know what I mean? That experience when you're watching a movie and you want it to be a movie. Like, you want it to be like, okay, make me feel like I'm watching a movie, not like something's happening to me.
Well, yeah, it's like the phrase, like even when the movie's over, like you may be done with the movie, but the movie's not done with you.
Exactly.
That's kind of what, and I think Texas Chainsaw fits in there nicely. But I have a question, though, in terms of, like, what do you think about Texas Chainsaw that it stands out from the list that you just mentioned?
I think, first of all, it refuses to give you any backstory on any of the characters. It's almost as if like that is not even what matters.
Context is like kind of out the window.
It feels like you're witnessing something rather than watching a story unfold. It's like you're watching the movie from a different perspective than you would any other horror movie. Like when I watch Babadook, which is included in my list, which a movie you and I both have seen.
Yeah.
That is a horrifying tale about a mother being possessed and going insane. And we'll always remember that shot of her holding up the knife to her son, and it's insane. But it still feels like I'm watching a story unfold of a mother being possessed, and it's obviously about grief and trauma and all that stuff. When I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm watching stuff happen to these people.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the appealing part of the grindhouse genre a little bit, is that like some of the grainy, dirty filmmaking does just make it feel like you're there, if that makes any sense, in a weird way, because you think it'd be the opposite. When it's like clean looking, it feels more real, like you're looking at a person.
Blair Witch, which is a movie you said you watched last night with your girlfriend, she watched it for the first time.
Yeah. Awesome experience.
That movie is obviously the most obvious version of that. But it is like revolutionary in found footage, because it is still to this day the only movie that genuinely feels like true found footage.
Yeah. I know. It's such like, yeah. I can go on about Blair Witch. That movie excites me.
But yeah, so I think that's the thing about Texas Chainsaw. It feels like I'm witnessing something happening. And a lot of that is due to the way this movie opens and just tells you that what you're about to see is going to be insane.
Yeah.
And the marketing of this movie, the poster of it is like one of my favorite posters. It has one of my favorite taglines. I'm a huge nerd for movie poster taglines in general, but this one is, I wrote it down. It's "Who will survive and what will be left of them." I mean, come on.
It's so badass.
It's up there for me. Like the Thing tagline is really good. Man is the warmest place to hide. But this one is just, it's unsettling.
The 2003 remake does the same kind of documentary style opening, but they make it more like, if that makes any sense. Like they show a bunch of like, crime scene photos, and like they make it feel like an actual documentary. And the famous thing that it ends with is like, this is the real footage of the police investigating. So they show like this janky black and white camera view of these cops looking at the crime scene, and then out of nowhere Leatherface comes in, then like knocks the camera over and they die. but you see in the few frames like a couple blurry images of Leatherface, and it freeze frames, and the narrator, I think they got the same narrator too.
John Larroquette?
Yeah, they got the same guy.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and he says like, this is the only known image of Thomas Hewitt, who they called Leatherface. The case remains open to this day. Movie ends.
Okay.
And so a lot of people I remember in middle school and onward thought that was like, oh, that's real. Like this movie is like a no joke, you know?
Do you think that could happen now? Do you think we're at an age with like the internet and where we talked a lot about this in the Halloween episode about where Netflix true crime documentaries have gone, how we're so well informed and not informed at all in the same time about the crimes of the world.
Yeah.
Do you think something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or even Blair Witch could happen now? Which is something could come out and give you that feeling of like, holy shit, did this happen?
Like a movie could come out and do that? I thought you were saying for a second, like, can like the events of Texas Chainsaw happen in real life?
No, I'm talking about a movie. Like, could a movie like that give you people that feeling now?
I mean, I think it's just done differently. The movies you mentioned on your list were fairly recent. Like Hereditary gives you that feeling in a very different way.
But Hereditary I can still watch, and parts of that movie are actually kind of funny, the way Tony Collette reacts. And also I'm just like, oh, I'm watching like these spirits possess this family.
Yeah, so what are you getting at then?
I'm talking about watching a movie and being like, fuck, did that happen?
Okay.
Like giving that experience to teenagers.
No, I don't think it can happen. I see what you're trying to ask. You're trying to ask, like, can an audience be fooled into thinking that it's real or blur that line between reality and fiction?
Because obviously adults can go into a Blair Witch and know that's not real, but still it gives you that feeling of it could be.
Yeah. I get that where it's presented very, very real and naturalistic looking. I think it's possible, but I don't think any audience is really going to be fooled nowadays. Anyone can just do a Google search and like on their phone and find out who made this, where this came from, and read on Twitter the discourse around it.
I feel like you could do it if someone made like a janky indie movie on YouTube and just uploaded it.
But there are a ton of those.
Right?
People figure it out. But people do investigate and look into it, though. You know what I mean?
But those are the only ones that are like, you could pull off. It can only be pulled off on the internet, on YouTube by someone. So it can't be released in theaters.
Exactly. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. I think there are a ton of, I like going down those rabbit holes and finding those
I'm
cool
kind of
projects.
egging you on a little bit because I want you to talk a little bit about some of them. Like, what are some videos or like projects that you've experienced throughout the years on YouTube where you're like, okay, I need to. Who made this? What is this? This feels so real. It feels so unsettling.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what's it called? There's one that's like a vlog of this girl that in the vlogs look super sterile and corny, and they're really like professionally made, but it's supposed to feel like a disconnected influencer who just says the most like almost like, you ever hear someone talk and it's like they're on to nothing? Where it's like it's trying to sound smart. She's like, well, sometimes I like to stop and look around, and it was basically made to be shat on.
This is the library. There's like so many super old books from all of our ancestors and things, so it's like not really my vibe.
And you don't remember who it is?
No, I need to find it. I can find it. Give me a second. I don't remember the name of it.
If you do think about it, maybe we can put it in the edit. Like we can pull it up or something.
We'll pop it up in the video version. So if you watch this episode instead of listening to it, you will know what the name of it is. But eventually though, it gets like the footage gets grainier and weirder, and as the episodes go on, and eventually leads to this person like implied being kidnapped and shit like that. But it's clearly like a big statement on like rich people trying to act like they have something to say.
I remember a couple years ago you showed me Alan Tutorial.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get at next.
People who don't know, explain that.
Alan Tutorial's a YouTube project made by Alan Resnick, and essentially it's tutorial videos that are really absurd and bizarre and get weirder and weirder as the videos go on. Like the first one starts, literally the tutorial is how to punch a hole in an envelope. Like how to cut a hole out of an envelope. Very strange, useless tutorials, but it's clearly like an artistic statement about like useless content online that aged really well for being like 10 years old.
And as the series goes on, his hands get dirtier and you don't know why.
Well, exactly.
You only see his hands. Like it's like you never see his face.
It's always from his own perspective. Yeah. And he talks with this high pitched weird voice like, hi, this is Alan and this is a tutorial on this.
Hey everybody. I'm gonna do a tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe and like.
And so, yeah, it gets more and more scary.
One of the episodes you showed me is like he's trying to do a tutorial and you just hear knocking.
Yeah. Someone's violently knocking on the door while he's doing. You don't know who's knocking or why. Once in a while he's in the tutorial, he turns the camera away. He's like, hey, stop it. and gets back to the tutorial. It's very absurd, and you have to watch it to fully understand it.
There's an episode where he's just like locked out of his room and he's doing the tutorial on his roof.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he shows his window. He's like, I can't go in my room right now.
Yeah, and he ends up getting like in the woods and he's filthy and bloody. It gets weird as hell. I don't want to totally spoil it for people who want to go
Sorry,
check it
yeah.
out, but
the reason I'm trying to give away some episodes is to let people know. I'm like, no, it gets crazy. You should check it out.
it gets nuttier and nuttier as it goes. Take my word for it.
And I feel like those are like the last vestiges of what movies like Texas Chainsaw and Blair Witch did
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah. I think a lot of that energy has been transferred to online. People doing like scary TikToks or scary Instagrams that have like those weird artistic projects. I think nowadays people are just good at separating the reality from the fiction, but can still consume in a unique way with the ARGs, augmented reality games.
Yeah, I think you've gotten, like, I remember back in, I hope you don't mind me revealing this, but like I remember back in like lockdown period, you went into this insane rabbit hole of like these weird
I couldn't get enough of them at one
web
point.
series and projects. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this with a friend, but it was one of those experiences that I had where I was like, oh, this is the first time where you and I separate ways in what we're interested in.
Yeah, 100%.
Where it was like one of the, I mean, obviously that happens. We're not always going to be interested in the same thing.
Yeah,
But it was one of those like you got so into it and I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I don't know why you're like so into it. But also like for me, it was a little too real. Like watching Alan Tutorial, I couldn't watch all of it just because it was like, it felt a little too real.
Which is why I liked it. You know what I mean? That was like the appeal that it had, where it's like, this doesn't feel like a made up thing. You know what I mean?
So I think that being said, it's kind of amazing that Texas Chainsaw, a beautiful looking movie that has become iconic, still makes me feel that way, where I'm just like, oh God.
Yeah, that's very true.
Even though I'm like noticing the filmmaking, it's kind of crazy what it accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, the movie has this like, kind of like what we already touched on it, but this grossness in the air. And I think there's like some weird implied, cosmic or mystic horror elements to it that there are video essays and like actual written essays that you can find that like break down different, different parts of it, where it'll say like, they talk about Saturn being in retrograde early on and people having these weird fates due to their astrological signs. And there's these like close-up shots of the sun and, the hitchhiker, when he gets kicked out of the van, how he writes like a weird symbol in blood that they don't understand, that Franklin kind of obsesses over.
Yeah, this whole movie is like surrounded by this cosmic evil that's going on. And I feel like the opening of the movie with the radio broadcast of all the shit that's going down in the world is emphasizing that.
Yeah, there's just something nasty in the air. And I think a lot of people have interpreted it in different ways. I think one of the big ones also is like, America post-Vietnam, like the illusion of the American dream and the nuclear family has been just kind of dismantled forever.
Well, that's really interesting you bring that up, because I remember like reading about how Hooper, is it Toby or
it's Toby? To lay that to rest, because people goofed on us
and our
Poltergeist reaction. People goofed on us because we kept saying Tobe Hooper, and people were like, "Nope, it's Toby." So just we heard you. We're good. We're saying it Toby now.
So Tobe Hooper talked about how like the opening of that film and just the whole like essence of that film came out of feeling lied to by the government during the Nixon era, especially with Vietnam, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
and so this movie was kind of birthed out of that like dread and paranoia.
Yeah, and that false sense of security.
I mean, 70s
that America presents.
70s paranoia movies are like a whole genre. Like the Coppola's The Conversation, Parallax View. These are all movies that were birthed out of this feeling of we were lied to by people that we were meant to trust.
Yeah, it's a very stark contrast from the 50s optimism in those movies. It's a Wonderful Life and those like where it's like small businesses matter. The American dream is great.
But then the Reagan era came along and it was like it's fine.
Yeah.
We're all good. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah. So it's very interesting seeing how art changes context. You know what I mean? And
that's why the 80s were all like, it's Back to the Future.
Yeah, I know exactly. So I think with this movie, it's very interesting though, because like I said, there's something like you can interpret it in a number of ways of what it is, which is so cool. Like what you mentioned, how there's very little context given. You don't know a lot about the family's backstory, which is the cool part of it. Because there are already theories that the family like is making blood sacrifices to like Lovecraftian gods and shit like that. Because the dad literally says something along the lines of, I think I wrote it down if you want to pull it up, but where he says like, there's some things you got to do, or I don't take no pleasure in killing.
Yeah, you wrote it here. I just can't take no pleasure in killing. There's just some things you got to do. Don't mean you got to have to like it.
Yeah. And so some people have taken that line and the fact that of how like the grandpa sucks the blood out of Sally's finger and is like kind of doing his little happy dance while he drinks it.
I gotta say, man, every time he starts sucking the blood, I'm always like, oh, fuck, he's alive?
That's like I know, that's the most disturbing part. In my opinion, that's the part I hate watching the most.
I have like a moment that like I barely could watch yesterday. Yeah. But we'll talk about the dinner scene because I genuinely think the dinner scene might be this is a very hyperbolized podcast thing to say, but it might be the scariest thing I've ever seen in a movie.
Sure, fair enough.
Like for me personally. But okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the whole like that line specifically. Let's unpack that a little bit because I think when I was watching this movie, this take that I had was humans are very violent people. We kill for food. We have very sinister instincts that we basically have suppressed, at least some people have suppressed to become functioning members of society. So if you look at this family, they haven't suppressed anything. This hitchhiker that comes in the van with them is basically telling the group of kids that are just like, oh, you can't be eating meat like that. The factory produced, they put people out of jobs. You got to do it this way. And if you kill them this way with an axe, you can get
a sledgehammer. Yeah.
You can get all the meat and you can get everything. Are these, I think the thing that I was thinking about is like, is this family, the way they're being portrayed, is this the purest version of what a human is? Which is we're animals, we're violent. Throughout history with like the revolution in technology, with like putting chickens in cages, like factory made meat and
maintaining
hormones.
cattle and all that.
Right. Have we basically suppressed those urges, but in doing that, is that the more evil thing?
Yeah, which I mean, I think it depends on your worldview, of course, because like people also have good instincts. At least I think, you know, when you see a kid in trouble, your instinct is to go and protect the kid. You know what I mean? We have instincts to also protect and nurture each other in weird ways too. So it's weird because like I remember we talked about that a little bit in the Clockwork Orange podcast that we did, where we talked about how like Alex DeLarge, that character, might be seen as like the most primal version of a human.
Right.
But it's like, is primal, does that count as pure, or is that just another third of what it is to be human versus the other part of you that should have that filter to control themselves?
And
You know
both,
what I mean?
both Clockwork Orange and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, what they do really well is they present that question. Clockwork Orange a bit more directly, and I'm not saying that as a diss towards Clockwork Orange, but Clockwork Orange is like...
It's very philosophical.
Right. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an 80-minute movie that could also be just looked at a grindhouse slasher movie. But if you want to read into it, you can see that. Both those movies present those questions and don't answer them for you.
Yeah.
Which is like, movies, baby. That's what you should be doing. Those are the best kind of stories. Like, I don't want to be told what I should think. I want to be told the questions I'm supposed to ask myself.
Yeah, which I think, you know, it's the movie feels like a very pure feeling, if that makes any sense.
Man. Yeah,
where it's not making a statement. I know what you're getting at. Where it's asking a question. It's just bringing the things where it's like it feels like Tobe Hooper's just letting out his frustrations.
That's a great.
You know what I mean?
Honestly, that's like a perfect way to describe it. It's like a feeling.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to make something that just gives you a feeling.
Yeah.
And not rely on the general accepted structures of what a movie is, which is like, okay, I want to follow a main character, a protagonist. I want to learn a little bit about them and what's motivating them. Because that's a thing that we haven't talked about, is that this isn't like Michael Myers where he comes back home and starts killing people.
Yeah, they walk straight into his home.
They might have let them go.
Yeah.
The cook, the dad, not the father figure, but basically the cook of the family, who's a gas station owner.
He's seen as like the patriarch of the family. Yeah.
He's basically like, oh, you don't want to go over there. Crazy things can happen. You don't want to go over there.
Yeah. Come with me. Have some barbecue.
And it could also be read as like, he's not even trying to get them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And when they leave, it's not like they follow him. It's like interesting that it's Pam, I think.
The red shorts girl.
Red shorts girl, Pam. Pam is the one who walks in with Kirk.
Yeah.
Like Kirk walks in first, right? And when Kirk walks in, Leatherface opens the metal door, hits him, grabs him in. And then Leatherface doesn't just go outside the house and grab Pam as well. Pam also walks in.
Yeah.
And Leatherface is like, well, fuck, okay, more.
Well, that's what I
like.
love
He's
is that-
almost like annoyed that like, okay, shit.
Well, that's it. And Leatherface like looks around the hallway like, who the fuck are these people coming in my house?
One of my favorite moments is Leatherface like looking out the window, then sitting down, like putting his hand on his head.
Yeah.
And you don't know why he's doing, but then until the patriarch of the family comes home and starts like giving Leatherface some shit, you realize he was like getting anxious about what he's gonna tell his family.
Stressed. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, oh, it's funny to watch this movie and realize he's kind of the runt of the litter.
well, I know. And that actually, so I watched, you know this, I told you off mic, but for listeners, I watched a good chunk of the new 2022 Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. And
Yeah.
I watched more of it, by the way, since we last talked about it.
Oh,
So
you did?
I got about an hour in or something like that.
And that movie just came straight to Netflix.
It was a Netflix made movie, yeah. And so it sucked. Which one of the most like frustrating things about it, because I can go on about like I don't think the idea of the movie is absolutely horrible, but the way they portrayed Leatherface is such a frustrating like crime.
Do they basically just make him like Michael Myers?
Yeah, they make him Jason. Like he walks and he's like menacing and slow.
Sure, yeah.
And he's like stupidly strong.
No, I think what's interesting about this Texas Chainsaw movie, like obviously the original Texas Chainsaw movie, is like you kind of, maybe I'm alone on this. You kind of feel for Leatherface in a way.
Oh, well, because he's mentally challenged clearly, and so he's clearly just raised in an environment where, yeah, of course,
Like like when he's at home trying to like when he puts basically Pam in that hook.
yeah.
And he's like chopping up Kirk and everything. It's kind of just feels like he's doing his job. And
Yeah.
he starts getting more and more stressed because he's like, oh, what am I going to tell them? Like, God, this is so annoying. Like,
Yeah.
and he feels so stressed out because he knows his family's coming home soon. So he has to prepare dinner.
Yeah.
Like he feels like an overworked housewife.
Well, that's the thing. Like going back to what we said about that this movie's a dismantling of the security of America and the illusion of the nuclear family, is that the family is presented like that, where so we have the breadwinning patriarch who owns his own business, and then there's the overworked housewife, like you mentioned, who's responsible and getting yelled at, and then the hitchhiker's like the
shitty younger brother.
Yeah, the son, the ADHD spazzy rebellious kid.
Yeah,
And
I wonder
so-
if you relate to that at all.
Yeah, I know, right? But yeah, then there's the grandpa who barely functions. I don't know, whatever. But
Well, but no, that's true. But that's come on, that's true too. Not to be mean against grandpas, but there's always that family member that's, wow, that guy's old.
but
And I'm not saying all our grandpas suck blood, but like,
yeah, circling back real quick to the 2022 Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes,
is that,
sorry, yeah.
No. Is that I think the part that as soon as I realized like, oh, this movie's dumb, is his first kill. He's in a car. He's mourning this old lady. I won't give away details because it's just boring. But a guy tries to stop Leatherface from touching something, so he puts his hand out and their hands kind of cross. Leatherface takes his hand and bends it all the way backwards. Like straight up, it was a Jason kill. You know what I'm saying? He bends it all the way backwards, and then it splits and the bone pops out from his wrist. And he's like, ah, and he takes his arm and then stabs him in the throat with the bone.
oh,
that
so they
popped out.
literally just make him Jason.
He's just Jason, exactly. I'm like, that's so like Leatherface is not that. You know what I'm saying?
So it's Leatherface in this movie is played by Gunnar Hansen.
Yes.
He is a tall man. Leatherface is strong,
Yeah,
but yes, to your point, he is not Jason.
he's not supernatural strong.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I'm just like, what else could you do with we were talking about
Yeah.
this with Halloween, where I'm like, what are you gonna do with a sequel to this kind of movie?
Yeah.
Like people forget that these movies weren't meant to be franchises, but because they were so successful, and because when you have a slasher, it's immediately like becomes an icon. Just
Yes.
like how serial killers become icons.
Yeah, in a weird way, we're fascinated by killers.
And so you immediately want more.
Yeah,
and
I
so,
mean-
like we're every year we're gonna get a new Dahmer Netflix series, like because that's just how it's gonna be.
Wait, have you seen anything of the Texas Chainsaw 3D that came out in like 2012, 13 or something like that?
To be clear, it's kind of like Halloween to me. I haven't seen any
Okay.
of the franchise material.
None of them are real. I haven't seen the direct sequels, to be clear. I haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 or 3 or any of those other
Two
movies.
is directed by Tobe
Hooper.
Hooper.
Yeah,
But
I
I've
know
heard-
that much,
I've
yeah.
heard 2 is weirder, and it's like
Funnier.
the way Blank Check described it, because they talked about it for a little bit off on a tangent. They're like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 feels like what Gremlins 2 was to the first Gremlins, which is
Gotcha.
like, okay, I can't remake the first one, but so let me just get weird.
Yeah, fair enough. I think like With the Texas Chainsaw 3D, that movie, in my opinion, is worse than the 2022 one. Texas Chainsaw 3D is like awful, you know, like, and it's, mind you, it's 3D, and they try to do 3D. There's a part where Leatherface throws a chainsaw and the CGI comes out of the screen. It's kind of awesome.
That's kind of great.
But
I would love to see that in 3D.
and there's a part where a girl holds a gun aiming at a barn door, and she goes, "Welcome to Texas, motherfucker." Like,
What's the one where you showed me the clip of where it's Alexander Daddario being like,
that's 3D. Yeah,
that's the one where she calls him cuz because they're cuz.
oh yeah. So she finds out their family, which also, this is a complete side note. I don't want to get too derailed, but chronologically, it makes no sense.
No,
'Cause they try to
absolutely not.
stay loyal to like, oh, this happened in the 70s, and this baby was there, and that was Alexander Daddario. So that would make her like 40 something years old, but she's like 20. Anyway, though, but yeah. So you learn that she's cousins, and she helps Leatherface and throws him his chainsaw and is like, "Do your thing, cuz."
It is kind of wild that Alexander Daddario didn't really become a Scream Queen. They tried to obviously make it happen, but like with Texas Chainsaw, I guess, but like she feels like she'd be a good Scream Queen.
Yeah.
You know who's got it? Is fucking Sydney Sweeney with Immaculate. Dude.
I haven't seen Immaculate, but I heard it was good.
You know what's cool about Immaculate? It's not like a perfect movie. It has flaws. It's 80 minutes and it has its premise and runs with it.
Yeah.
We need more of like those B movie, like we were watching Evil Dead 2 and that's kind of what that movie is.
It's a movie that commits to its premise. It doesn't try to be more. It just wants you to have fun in the theater.
And Immaculate is kind of like that. It's having fun. It has a banger ending and it's honestly the most I've ever liked Sydney Sweeney.
Yeah.
She's really fucking good in it.
Cool.
I haven't seen Euphoria, but people have compared her performance to their performance in Euphoria because in Euphoria she has a lot of freak out scenes.
Yeah.
And like Sydney Sweeney might be really good at just freaking out. She might not be the best at playing a Meg Ryan type.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though you and I both kind of have fondness for anyone but you.
I was gonna say I actually low key really dug Anyone But You.
Okay, back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, so the whole family element of Leatherface and everything, I was super fascinated by with this movie. I want to talk a little bit about like certain set pieces in the movie, I guess, if you want to call them set pieces.
Yeah, just certain iconic moments.
When I was watching the van scene, which is
With the hitchhiker?
Yeah, the hitchhiker van scene. It's much longer than I've seen this movie a few times now, and every time I'm always surprised by how long it is. And I mean that in a good way, but I'm just like, this is not ending.
Yeah. It's like the uncomfortable long.
So it's played by Edwin Neal.
Okay.
And
he's great. He's so fucking good as a hitchhiker. Shout out to Edwin.
I just feel like I want to leave that van immediately.
Well, it's interesting. That kind of reminds me, like, one of the fears that this movie taps into for me, just to kind of, not to go super, I want to stay focused on the hitchhiker scene, but I just want to make a point that, like, I think I never feel like I'm more out of touch than when I leave LA. You know what I mean? Like I feel like at the minute I go to Central California or Northern California, I look down at my outfit and like, I look fucking stupid right now out here.
Same.
You know what I mean? And so it's interesting. I think like,
I mean, I was raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, so imagine me going back home and being like, oh wow, I'm the only one wearing a jacket and it's like fucking 60 degrees here.
yeah, there's always something exactly, or like the way I talk to people. And so sometimes like I feel a need to like prove I'm like a cool LA guy when I'm like out of town, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you have that instinct at all.
Dude, I always want to prove myself, and then right when I start talking, I hate myself.
yeah, we're like, oh man, I'm out of touch.
Yeah, so I'm actually, so I'm in LA, I'm doing a YouTube channel, and I have this movie reaction. It's doing fairly well. Fuck, I sound so dumb. Like, I sound so stupid.
I know, so it's interesting, and I'm not trying to say like this movie is like accurate to that at all. It's not like, you know, everywhere else outside of LA is
but
like
it is that feeling
and,
of just like there's a part of America that we've all forgotten about and rejected, especially if you are a so-called coastal elite.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a feeling of being in a bubble. By the way, the cat's coming in behind you.
Oh, you can't come in, buddy. I'm sorry. There's too many wires, buddy.
Yeah, I can't have you chewing on anything.
I'm sorry, buddy. Do you want me to pet you a little bit?
You want me to cut?
No, keep it going.
Should we beep out the cat's name just in case?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
We want the cat to have his privacy.
Yeah. Maintain the, you know, anonymity.
It's an enemy.
An enemy?
I'm pretty sure it's an enemy, yeah.
An enemy is what Finding Nemo lives in.
That's kind of what I was thinking of.
Okay, cool. Just making sure.
I like how
sometimes I can't tell if you like.
I know. This movie confronts you with the fact it's like America is not just one thing. It's all things.
Yeah.
And we have to accept
The
that.
good and the bad.
Yeah.
Essentially. And yeah, exactly. Because, yeah, just to be clear, LA can also be just as fucking dangerous as the characters, or what they go through, too.
And I mean, there's filmmakers.
It's everywhere.
There's filmmakers that have definitely, John Singleton with Boys in the Hood. Mm-hmm. That's like an LA story.
Yeah.
But that's a part of LA that we don't, you and I don't have to confront. Mm-hmm. But when you watch Boys in the Hood, I watched it for the first time last year, and I'm like, shit, this is an LA that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
And that's insane. I've lived in the city for 7 years.
It's just an experience that you and I just didn't have.
And that's kind of what this movie gives a cough when the hitchhiker comes on board.
Yeah.
And you're like, shit, man, these people are real.
Yeah.
They're not just in movies, even though this is a movie.
I know. And as soon as I remember how much it escalates as soon as he takes the knife, and it's such a perfect slow dial turn where you can see everyone's getting more and more nervous, and when he takes the knife, everyone's like, okay, all right,
Why do you think he takes his hand and slashes it?
I'm sure there's many different ways to interpret it. One of the things that I read was actually related to some of the cosmic horror stuff I talked about, where it's like some people say it's like him marking them for death, when he smears the blood on the car. You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like bloodletting is a very classic, ritualistic gesture that some people do. And then cutting Franklin's hand too is kind of another gesture of that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But I don't really know what my interpretation is. I don't think there needs to be one. Honestly, some people are just fucking nuts and think doing weird shit to themselves is funny.
Yeah, he's just maybe having a good time.
Yeah, that might have just been his way of just he can't control himself. Kind of like if we're going off of the nuclear family thing of him being the spazzy rebellious kid.
I like Franklin as a character a lot, the brother.
Yeah, the whiny brother.
He might be the closest to what I am. And in the sense of just never feeling comfortable in silence, always having this level of anxiety and just wanting people to tell you that it's going to be okay, feeling left out.
Yeah, have trouble letting things go too.
And thank you.
And also,
yeah. But I feel like I relate to him a lot in that sense. Especially that scene when he's talking to Sally. He's like, okay, you don't think he'll follow us. I mean, he was probably just doing this for that, right? He didn't mean anything by it, right? Mm-hmm. Did I say, that conversation that he has with Sally, I have a version of that with myself constantly. So it was just interesting, something I was thinking about.
Yeah. I mean,
who are you?
Which one are you? I'm Sally.
Yeah.
I'm the lucky one.
A BuzzFeed quiz of which one from Texas Chainsaw Massacre are you? But yeah, so I don't know.
I mean, Franklin's definitely interesting because with the kind of the whole thing of Saturn being in retrograde and them all dealing with different things, he's the only one that kind of gives in to those negative emotions and those feelings. And he's the one who's probably the most realistic to bring it up, considering the shit that goes down later. He was probably the most sensible one of them all. He didn't want to go and look for people. He didn't want to do any of the dangerous shit.
Well, that's also another thing about this movie is what if all your inner anxieties and insecurities were right?
Yeah.
Franklin is a type of guy where in any other movie, oh man, this guy's overthinking everything. Yeah. But in this movie, he's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this movie does no sugarcoating for that. You know what I mean? Everything bad in the world. Oh no, that's real. That's happening.
Yeah. And it's,
it doesn't offer any solutions or any hope towards you at the end. If you're lucky enough to get out alive, cool, but most won't.
The thing about this movie is that it could happen.
Yeah.
I know that's a hacky thing to say, but that's what's really scary.
Mm-hmm. And it does. I mean, really still, if you read stories of shit that happens nowadays, it still does. It's hard to get away with it now. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it still happens for sure.
You can't get away with being a cannibal nowadays. It sucks.
You can't do it. You can't say anything because these woke agendas won't let me be a cannibal, dude.
Jim Sido. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but he plays. He's credited as Old Man in this movie, but later on I saw his Wikipedia page. He's now known as Drayton Sawyer because I guess they give him a name in the later movies. But
he's the Sawyer family.
He's the cook, the patriarch, or whatever.
It's interesting because you know who plays the pseudo version of him in the 2003 version?
Who?
I forget his name. Maybe we can pull it up right here. But the guy that was the drill instructor on Full Metal Jacket.
Really? Him?
Yeah. Okay. So to give credit to the new 2003 version is that it is a different movie. It's not like a reenactment to the original at all. It's a very different experience. Not as good as the original, but it is different.
R. Lee Ermey.
Okay, cool. But yeah, basically this version of him disguises himself as like a cop. Like he's like, he dresses up as like a county sheriff and pulls people over. And that's how they bring in victims, essentially.
This actor, his performance is like so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because when you watch this movie for the first time, nothing really prepares you when Sally comes back to that gas station. I think his performance is the most interesting only because like you can get this feeling that he's trying to control the evil that he has inside of him.
Yeah.
Like even when he's like, it's okay now, don't be scared. It's fine. It's okay. Like he like switches on and off constantly. Like even when he's at the dinner table and he's telling the family to shut up, come on.
Yeah.
And then
have some decency, have some class.
And then when Sally starts laughing, Sally starts freaking out, he can't help but laugh. And he like jumps and he's like so like, it's kind of like watching Crispin Glover in Back to the Future where you're like, that's not a person. Like,
yeah. I know, it's so
every
strange.
movement is weird.
Well, yeah, it's almost like he wants it to be like this controlled, like classy way to kill people. Not this chaotic way.
I feel like his performance and his character is the movie's way of showing how we all try to like hide behind the false security of domestic life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's 100% what I think the movie's trying to do, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like, I think going off of what you said about the first time watching it experience, it's such like a fucked up twist if you really think about it. Like how it's just after that chase scene, that horrifying chase scene where she's running through all those twigs and branches, runs through the house, breaks out the window and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden she goes into the one place, she's like hugging him. You know what I mean? She's like begging to have him call the cops.
When you're watching the movie for the first time, you're also relieved that you're seeing a human.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, because now everyone's dead. And when you see that gas station owner with her, you're like, okay, a person. This feels like a human being because I don't know what the fuck I've been experiencing for the past like half hour.
And then so he's like, hang on, let me get help. And as soon as he leaves, I love the small touch that he leaves the door open. So there's still discomfort where you're like, fuck, like she's still not safe because there's someone out there.
And you in your mind, you're like, why is Leatherface not come in yet?
Yeah, well, because you think on paper, I think what most people would be expecting, at least on, first time watching it, would be like that guy would die, like Leatherface would kill the gas station owner or something like that. But then when he comes in with the rope, you're like, oh no.
But yeah, I mean, even before then, she obviously sees the meat cooking.
Yeah, there's still like this discomfort, this dial turn. While the meat's cooking, you hear the radio too.
Can we talk about the chase real quick?
Oh yeah.
It's so long.
I know, and it feels long in a good way.
You're
too.
actually exhausted.
And I love that there's no music as
well. Oh my God,
That's
I know.
the thing, which I don't want to just constantly bring it up again and again, but the remake has this like tense, like dun 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 when they're being chased, and it totally makes it feel like a movie.
Even though it's not Blumhouse, the remake is part of the Blumhouse generation of horror movies, which is just like, specifically, I'm talking about the Halloween David Gordon Green remakes, which is just like, they just don't get the essence of what makes those movies good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, with this movie though, they make, Leatherface has this big old jump scare, kills Franklin immediately. And then she's just booking it through the woods. And you feel that tension with no music, just simple filmmaking. But you can still feel, it feels so real, like the way he's kind of gaining on her a little bit, but having to kind of move through the branches and kind of cut his way through.
And she, like, there's a moment in the chase where you can see her face just going blank. Mm-hmm. Because this is after she's like, she runs to the house, and it's also this like sick feeling you have when you watch her run to the house because you think like she thinks she's knocking on someone's door, being like, "Let me in," and then when she goes in the house, she's like, "Okay, I'm in another place," but then you're like, "No, that's his place." Yeah. And she goes upstairs, sees the grandpa, jumps out the window, and then she keeps running. And when she's running, you see her now; her face is like empty.
Yeah.
Like, she's now exhausted.
She's like on another dimension right now, just pure adrenaline and fear. Well, and also there's part of me that like wondered if she wasn't screaming her head off, would she have gotten away a little easier? Because I feel like it would have been easier for Leatherface to follow the sounds of her screaming because it's so dark outside.
Yeah, maybe.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe this is me overthinking, but she's running just, the entire time, which is fair, perfectly reasonable reaction.
She saw her brother in a wheelchair just like get slashed open.
And a guy with skin for a mask is chasing her with a chainsaw. If there's a time to scream.
I'm not saying you're like this, but I really dislike, even though we're doing a podcast and maybe that's the point of this.
Yeah.
I'm always against, unless it's painfully obvious, I'm always against like the whole like plot hole conversations about anything. Like, Sometimes it's a movie and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm never really entertained by the like, why didn't she just, you know? Because I'm like, I don't know, man. Maybe this movie's trying to show how people are. This person's genuinely terrified, and there's nothing else.
Yeah,
she is not a smart person that watches movies. This person is chasing after her. So guess what? When humans are faced with irrational experiences, they act irrationally.
Well, Ryan Hollinger has an amazing video essay on Green Room that's all about that. It's I forget what it's titled. Something along the lines of like the importance of making dumb decisions or something like that.
I've seen that video because you told me about it. People are dumb.
Yeah, especially in adrenaline, fear-induced situations.
You know how many times I've reacted in a dumb way to a very like dramatic situation? I don't think like, but I should have done this like I'm a film critic. Like I don't think like that. So unless it's like painfully obvious that the filmmaker didn't think things through.
There's like a fine line between making like overly smart characters and like overly dumb characters. And I definitely agree with you. You know, I think for me, I like to look into it sometimes just as like for fun, but I won't legitimately criticize the movie over it.
I understand. That's why I preface it with being like, I understand this is a podcast. Yeah. It's fun to talk about those things.
But you know what movie does really fuck this up hard is the 2022 Texas Chainsaw. Dude, I would trust me. Like,
I need to watch this now.
It's like you should just for fun because there's a part when the two characters saw Leatherface, saw dead bodies and shit. So they run into a party bus where all the other characters are. They've just been pushed into the bus and don't know what's happening. They're all kind of confused.
Well, is this a scene in the trailer where they're like, "You're canceled, bro"?
Well, I'm leading up to it. I'm talking about the irrational decisions when you were saying like how people make dumb decisions.
Yeah,
this is a bad version of it where like. So everyone's crammed in a bus. They don't know what's going on. They're out of the loop. They're all confused. The two main characters did see what's going on. They saw dead bodies and they saw like barely escaped Leatherface. And they get in the bus and they tell the driver like, just fucking drive. Like we got to get out of here. They don't say what happened. They didn't say there's someone killing people or anything out there. They just said fucking drive. And the guy starts driving and all of a sudden it's implied that Leatherface like slashed the tires like as it was driving with his chainsaw. And so the car comes to a halt. The driver just kind of gets up and starts to walk out of the bus and they're like, what are you doing? They don't say there's someone killing people. He walks out anyway. And then his head just gets thrown in like, oh, he died. And then that's when the famous moment in the trailer. Listeners, if you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to watch it.
Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
It's one of the greatest things I've ever seen.
This is gonna sound pretty pretentious. This all seems like one draft. Like they finished it, hit X, sent export, sent it in the email being like, work done here. Let's just film this as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, and let's put it out on Netflix where no one will see it. So it's like, what are you gonna do? You know?
Yeah. So
I need to check out this movie. So I'll have more. I'm sorry I don't have more to say about it, but it's just like I haven't seen it.
No. I know. I've grown up with Leatherface in my peripheral for a long time.
Right.
You know, so the only thing I don't know anything about it because I haven't played it, but I do want to play the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game.
Is it supposed to be good?
I think so.
Yeah, you also wrote down in your notes. I'm just trying to hit some certain points before we get to the, like, I want to talk about the dinner scene in length.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, you put in your notes, not a gory movie at all, but it's still absolutely disgusting.
Yes.
That's true. It stands out to me every time. Like, there's really not as much, like, bloody violence and these insane kills as we remember.
Yeah, it's essentially, it's mostly just a lot of terror. And
it's more focused on how scared these people are and how frightening everything around them is.
Yeah, even before they get to the crazy killing stuff, there's like a shot of like, the dead armadillo and like when they're exploring the abandoned house, so you see that bundle of spiders.
I thought a lot about Hereditary when I saw that dead armadillo on the street, and like you think about the head on the street in Hereditary, without spoiling whose head it was. I thought a lot about Hereditary in that sense. I'm like, I wonder how inspired those things were. But
sure.
Yeah, the spiders in the corner, like it just immediately adds a sense of like this.
There's like discomfort through the characters at all times.
It's like the world around them is rotting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think Tobe Hooper does such a good job conveying that feeling just by having the characters be uncomfortable with their environments. Because you can always, like a lesser filmmaker could easily have the actors just be like, oh, I don't know about this, guys. But the movie makes you feel it with them. You see what they see. It focuses on these weird little anomalies that they come across.
And like, yeah, I mean, to your point though, like there's no reason for us to really cut to that corner with the spiders.
Yeah.
But it adds a vibe and sense to the movie and like a sense of dread.
If you don't mind me bringing this up, going off of the world.
Fuck you, man.
Don't talk about anything on this show. But no, I was going to ask though, because I know you've dealt with cynicism a lot. You know, and you deal with a lot of feelings of like looking at the news and seeing bad shit happening. And you've talked about it on other episodes too.
I feel very pessimistic sometimes.
Yeah, knowing you as a friend, I know you and I have had conversations about that. And so I'm sure this movie speaks to you on a deeper level, you know, in some ways. How have you, I will say also, you have gotten better when it comes to that. You know what I'm saying? Like some of you, I noticed a lot of those layers have been shed. What have you done to kind of like improve on that? Or I don't even know if you call it improving, but how have you been happier about that? Or how have you coped?
This is the most basic answer, but it's also the most obvious. I got off social media, so I don't have a Twitter, I don't have an Instagram, because I think what I ended up doing a lot was I would consume the news by reading a series of tweets and seeing what was trending, or watching Instagram stories or TikToks, and that's how I would get my news, that's not news, that's reaction to the news. And you could say a lot of journalism is just reaction to the news, but at least that's like a more direct source than that is. And so when I opened up Twitter, I just felt this like surge of anxiety, which was basically like, the world is fucked and everyone's equally freaked out about it. And when you actually put in effort, like I did something that's going to sound ridiculously simple to our listeners, but I got a New York Times subscription.
Yeah.
And I just like started reading the news in the morning. And that's going to sound pretty ridiculous probably to our listeners and maybe even our older listeners who are like, yeah, no shit. But it's like,
no, but not a lot of people are like, you know, deliberate about getting their news, you know, where they get it from.
In the morning, first thing I do with my coffee is I read the news and then I stop. Like there is a feeling of like the news cycle doesn't have to be 24 hours. It doesn't have to, it can stop.
Yeah.
There was an advantage of like being able to open up the newspaper, read it, close it, done.
I was
and just to complete my thought that like that has helped me a lot with my cynicism of the world. Is like it helps when you're actually reading something that someone wrote and it has interviews with the sources and you get to learn about actually what's happening, and it doesn't make you feel better about the world. The world is still a very scary place, and the stuff going on right now is horrifying.
And we shouldn't put horse blinders to that reality either. I'm with you on that.
But there is a sense of just like reverting to cynicism that I was starting to feel gross by. Mm-hmm. Like there's that, like, you know, people our age always have this like, well, the world's bad, everything sucks. Like, oh man, we're all like, who knows if we'll even be around next year.
Yeah.
Everything's on fire. Everything sucks. Like people just casually say that. And sure, maybe that's a way of how people cope with things is to just say it in a joking way.
It's the Bo Burnham quote, 20,000 years of this, 7 more to go.
And I think that like you said, it's important not to put horse blinders on. It's important through art, express your anxiety because then you feel less alone. But then it's also important to not just make light of it, you know, and not to have the default mode be cynicism. Because then nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the classic saying, be the change you want to see in the world, you know? And I was at a hotel recently when I went out of town last week, and I saw some local news channel that was on, and they were doing like an ad. You know how they do the little news reel where they show like, you know, all the different, you know, anchors and stuff. And they're saying covering all the news that matters. And all of the stories were like horrible things that happened. It was all like covering the news that matters. Fire burns down, kills 3 people. Then like, you know, this person giving you the real action, shooting in this town. Like all of them were like terrible things that were happening.
Well, then you watch like, that's what Nightcrawler's about.
Well, exactly. And I'm like, it felt like almost like satire. Like it almost felt like a parody.
Yeah, it feels like one of those like interstitials that Verhoeven would do.
Exactly, yeah.
No, I mean, that's another thing, just to have some get a little bit deeper into that conversation. I also don't watch the news.
Yeah.
I try to read the news. It's somehow, I mean, it's probably obvious, like the fact that I don't have to see it makes it easier for me to process it, which maybe that's a fault on my own. Mm-hmm. But there is something better about reading something and letting yourself process it, because there's the problem with broadcast media is that it is kind of like Twitter, where it's just like, we're going to have 9 people on a panel just yell at each other.
Well, it's optimized. You know how we like to say that ironically?
Yeah. And you have to. If you want, nowadays especially, if you want someone to sit down and watch one thing, you have to make it the most bombastic thing. So I'm not saying I'm better than people, but I'm just saying like there is this feeling of like, no, it takes a little bit more work to sit down and read something than it does to watch something that has been optimized for you to not look at your phone.
Yeah.
So for you to not look at your phone has to be the most insane thing ever. Yeah. And that's like my long rambling answer about how I've been able to slowly shed the constant like pessimism and cynicism that I like sometimes will default to.
Yeah. I just want to share that want you to share that because, you know, I just do wonder if like listeners could get something out of that, you know, because I wonder if there might be listeners that struggle with that sort of thing too. It's easy to get lost.
Yeah.
In that.
And especially this podcast, I'm always prone to be like, yeah, this movie's about how the world's ending.
Yeah, exactly.
So movies are a great way I can process those feelings too.
Yeah. I mean, I've been looking into some of that stuff as well, you know, in terms of like how things that you can't control and things that you can. And a lot of it really comes down to is you can only control yourself and the things that you do. And like, it's like, if you have problems with the world, then like start being kinder, start being good, and you'll inspire that. You know what I mean?
I feel like, obviously COVID and lockdown didn't help the general dread that we all feel. So I feel like we're all going through this phase of trying to relearn what it means to be, to function in the world, you know? So, yeah.
Do you want to talk about the dinner scene?
Yeah, let's talk about the dinner scene.
Let's do the dinner scene.
Horrifying. She doesn't stop screaming for like straight up 15 minutes.
Yeah. And then they scream with her sometimes. You know, I love how like the we'll just say the dad for now, but how he's like, you know, shut up. You guys sound like a bunch of wolves, or how they're all howling together.
And he's like, well, this person's just the cook. You know, we do all the work.
Yeah.
And
Leatherface and I do the work.
The scene that I really wanted to talk about with this though is the, when they get the bucket out and they want Grandpa to do the killing. I was like, he's one of the best.
Yeah, like almost like it implied that they've been doing this for generations or something.
Yeah, and they give Grandpa a hammer or axe or whatever.
It was a hammer, yeah.
It was a hammer. And they hold her by her hair, by her neck.
Yeah, over the bucket.
And not many here's the thing with a lot of horror movies or just movies in general, there's a threshold that the filmmakers know that the audience will be able to handle. We can't have this person screaming too much or the audience will get annoyed. We can't have this person going through so much because the audience will pull back. It feels like this movie doesn't give a fuck about any of those rules. Sally will be screaming the entire time. No matter how exhausted your ears are of hearing it, no matter how much stress you feel, you will not leave.
Yeah, it's relentless on you.
It's relentless.
Yeah.
That's
how I feel. And then it
feel.
cuts to these close-ups of her eyes bugging out too. And you know, her thrashing. It does like kind of this kind of stylistic flair in a way. It's cutting back and forth.
Even though this movie has a lot of like crash zooms and like zoom outs and it has a lot of filmmaking tricks, that editing choice is the most like flair, the most sauce it's putting on it.
Yeah,
I know.
for sure.
But it's effective. It doesn't pull me out of it.
Yeah, and
how do you feel? Like, that's the thing I wanted to ask you. This scene terrifies me. Yeah. I still get scared. You have a feel. I feel like your response to these type of scenes, like I remember this because when we were watching Exorcist, I felt it. I have a real like explosive reaction to these type of scenes where even at home last night when I was watching, I was like, oh, fuck that. Fuck. I feel like you freeze.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, for this movie, I've seen it so many times since I was a teenager that like I'm used to it at this point. Like now when the scene's coming up, like, okay, turn the volume down. Like it's gonna get loud here. So I think at the time though, I remember I was amazed at what we already talked about, how relentless it was. I was like, holy fuck. The last half hour is just pure screaming.
But that's my question. Do you get scared?
Uncomfortable, more like. It's hard to really, really scare me. I think like once in a while, I think Hereditary is a movie that really, really scared me. And that was mostly done through like disturbing images and like weird movements and stuff. Like that's the kind of stuff that freaks me out, not so much like in your face screaming. I still felt a lot. And this is one of my favorite horror movies, but it's a different kind of experience that I get. I don't have the same like immediate fear that you have.
I think my fear is not that she's screaming.
No, totally.
My fear is more of like, I don't know how to get out of this.
Yeah.
Because as an audience member, whenever you're watching a horror movie, you're always like, just do this. What are you doing? You know?
But yeah, then in this case, she's like actually bound to a chair and her perpetrators are tormenting her.
And their reactions are so odd and bizarre. You don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
The hitchhiker's probably the only predictable one where I was like, oh, that guy's just a crazy guy. But like the dad, like in one moment, he'll just be like, everyone calm down, please.
And then he's like jumping up and down, clapping in excitement in the next scene.
And then the grandpa like sucks blood and wails like a baby, but
Yeah.
then he's also just like looks menacing, but he can't even hold a hammer properly. Why are they giving him this hammer? He obviously can't hit.
Yeah.
But they're acting like he's a functioning person right now.
Yeah,
So you
Leatherface is just slowly leaning in.
I think the unpredictability of their actions is what's terrifying.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, I know. And it's like oddly funny in a weird way when
Yeah.
like the grandpa can't hold the hammer or the sledgehammer.
Yeah, it plays like a just a slapstick comedy.
Yeah, they're like, Grandpa, come on, no, put it in.
It's almost like Weekend at Bernie's when you're watching that.
Exactly. And then, yeah, Sally just happened to be lucky enough to find a window to escape in.
I mean, which is the thing that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Is you always say this, but like Sally got lucky.
Yeah. She does not abide by the Jamie Lee Curtis rule where she was the morally pure one. She was just lucky.
And I mean, hell, I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween was lucky. Loomis came in last minute.
Oh, for sure. She was lucky too.
but
it's
even
argued
Loomis
that-
coming in and shooting, it feels like a movie moment.
Exactly.
Whereas this is just like she ran away and a truck came in at the perfect time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's
Get to the final chase scene.
The final chase, probably the thing that people think about the most when they think about this movie. It kind of just plays like a very loud silent film.
Yeah, because there's no dialogue and no music or anything.
Yeah, you just hear the chainsaw. The suit with the makeup is like iconic.
That's my favorite Leatherface.
I mean, obviously, it's the best look.
Yeah.
I do love like when he's just working at home and he has the apron when he looks like a
The
butcher.
apron and tie, yeah.
But him in makeup in the suit is just a vision. That's like that's gonna be in your nightmares.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing.
So I want you to talk about the dance because I feel like that's a moment that
Final chainsaw dance.
that you just like randomly will be like, dude, that scene's so beautiful.
It's so good looking,
So
dude.
we'll talk about that, but I want to talk about just the chaotic nature of the truck driver coming in,
Running over the hitchhiker.
Sally like being pulled into the truck, but then them getting out the other side running. Like there's this sense of just like no one has control. Things are spiraling.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a final act to a horror movie is what I mean.
Yeah, it's a very strange third act. I
That's
know
what
what you're
I-
getting at. It is strange. It's very like it's not written like a movie where it, yeah, like you said, needs to have that claptrap moment or anything. There's like a pseudo happy one where when he throws the wrench at Leatherface's face. But even then though, it feels like they barely just got out of it. You know what I'm
And
saying?
he just like threw whatever he had.
Yeah.
It's not like a hero moment. Yeah, there's not even like a final line or anything like that. There's just like this feeling of like, okay, I don't know what to do. I need to get out of here. And it's so hard to convey that feeling in a movie without it feeling forced or just like messy.
Yeah, and like there's even theories, going back to like kind of some of the cosmic-y shit, is that like it's another day because the sun's just starting to rise. It's now overnight. As soon as the sun starts rising, Sally's luck dramatically changes. You know what I mean? So that stuff's really interesting to me, at least when people, who knows what the horoscope would have been for that day for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But maybe things would have turned out okay. But
We haven't even mentioned Sally. I just want to mention her, Marilyn Burns. She does like an amazing job of feeling like someone that is actually going through this. I know that's a very simple way of putting it, but like I was telling you in our Halloween podcast, I'm always in awe of actors that are able to convincingly sell fear.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I do think that's a very hard thing to do. How do you do that in a film set where a lot of things are going on? How do you really sell that you're actually terrified?
Yeah.
And she does it. Okay, so pickup truck comes, she jumps into it. It is like a very tense 2 minutes when she's trying to crawl onto it.
I was gonna say like she barely makes it on. Every time I watch it, I'm always like, oh shit, get on.
I know. It's one of those like movie things where you're like, oh,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
so immersed.
And then she's just screaming, go, like rocking back and forth, laughing and cackling, kind of like maniacally.
And it ends on Leatherface
Mm-hmm.
with a chainsaw.
Just waving it around angrily with this beautiful sunrise behind him, just hitting the camera just perfectly. And then while he's in the middle of doing it, it just hard cuts out and the credits roll. Like it just is like, okay, go. That's it. We're done.
I mean, this is one of the best endings of all time to any movie.
Yeah, what's the phrase called when I don't know what it is. There's like a phrase for when movies feel like they jerk themselves off a little bit, when the movie takes too long to end because it wants to milk the feeling that you're in.
Yeah.
This movie does not do that. As soon as it's over, it just hard cuts to black. It's like you on the phone. Like, like listeners who don't know, Altaf is the most abrupt hang-upper when it comes to phone conversations.
But I also like having long phone conversations.
Oh yeah, you'll milk a whole conversation, but then as soon as you're done, you're like, all right, I'll see you later. Like, done. Like, there's no like kind of no you hang up or any jokingness to it. You just get the fuck out of the phone as soon as you're done.
I know.
And so this movie kind of gives off that energy where it just cuts to black in the middle of Leatherface just having his chainsaw dance.
Why did the chainsaw dance become iconic? Like, why is that such a memorable moment? It is. I'm not like,
Yeah.
this is not me like fighting against it, but I'm like, I watched it and I'm like, it looks beautiful and it's mesmerizing. But
Yeah.
what was that choice?
It's like beautiful and disgusting at the same time.
Which
You
is
know what
this
I mean?
entire movie.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's the interesting part. And it just somehow you feel like it's iconic while you're watching it. You know what I'm saying? You know, sometimes like when you see Freddy Krueger with his knives on his fingers, or you see Michael Myers raise the kitchen knife.
Yeah, you're almost like, that's an image.
Yeah, you're like, that's the thing. And so you see Leatherface waving his chainsaw around out in the open sun.
It's kind of like in Get Out when Daniel Kaluuya's character for the first time goes into the sunken place and there's that wide shot of him going down. You're like,
Exactly.
oh, well, that's an iconic shot.
That's an image. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's part of it. But yeah, like you said, it is mesmerizing. It's almost like dreamlike to look at. It's really quick too. It's a very short scene. I love rewatching it, and I wish it was longer. I can literally just watch Leatherface wave his chainsaw around for an hour if time would let me.
Well, you get to wrap up?
Yeah,
Thank you guys so
yeah, I am.
This was a great, by the time this goes up, our Cabin of the Woods commentary will be out as well.
Oh yeah, it will be.
So our horror month on Patreon and now on our YouTube will be over. This was a great month of exploring these horror movies with you on this podcast, but also watching the horror comedies on our Patreon. Spooky season's over. Now we're getting to family season.
Now we're getting to all the friendship and family season.
So we're watching Fast 5. We're watching... I'd love to do Fast 5, but you haven't seen it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much to our patrons for supporting us again and again. We really appreciate it. Last but not least, stay spooky, dudes.